Hi folks, this is Mr. Hutchings again. I'm filming this video as part of our walkthroughs on paper 1. So paper 1 is the Medicine Through Time course and the British sector of the Western Front. Remember, this paper is split up into two sections. The first 3 questions are focused on the Western Front, heavily source-based, and then the second part of the paper is based on Medicine Through Time. So again, you get 3 questions on that. This particular video is aimed at the dreaded source question. History teachers label this as the utility question because it is asking you what you can learn from 2 sources about a topic. So in this case, and we can see here, look, it says how useful. It's not saying are they useful or are they not useful. It's saying how useful. So you're going to be trying to find points on both sides here. What is useful about the sources, and potentially what are issues that you might run into with these sources. You must use sources A and B, and they're given to you as part of your examination pack. We also have a focus, and it's always going to come at the end of this first sentence. So our focus here, the thing that we're trying to find out about, is the problem of trench foot. So basically, this question can be rephrased as, what can you learn from these sources about trench foot? So for example, can we learn how trench foot was treated? Can we learn how big a problem it was? Can we learn how it affected people? These are all questions that you might be able to answer with your sources. Now, generally, you'll get a written source and you'll get a visual source. Sometimes they mix it up a bit and don't do that, but more often than not, you'll get a visual source and a written source, okay? Now, same kind of skills involved, slightly different ways of extracting information. So before I go through and start explaining to you even how I might go about answering this, we'll have a look at the sources. Remember, we're focused on what we can learn from them about trench foot. So, as part of your booklet, you get 2 sources. I've dismantled mine here. So this is source A that comes with this question, and then you have source B. Now, obviously, if this were the exam that you were doing, this would be stapled together. You can separate it, but I would warn against creating too much noise. You'll probably get told off by the invigilators and things like that. So we're not going to do source B just because I know many of you find the photographs or the visuals a little bit easier. That's not what revision should be about. Revision should be about targeting the things that you find more difficult. So we're going to look at the written source and have a go at writing a paragraph that hits all of our marks for this one. Now, we should remember that this question in total is worth 8 marks, which means 4 marks for discussion of source A and 4 marks for discussion of source B. Now, we're just going to be doing source A. Before I even start writing, I'm going to pick up my highlighter and I'm going to go through this source, highlighting certain things that might help me answer my question. Now, I know I'm just focused on trench foot, so I'm going to highlight anything here that tells me something about trench foot. I'm then going to start annotating those quotes I've highlighted, saying what it is that I can learn from that. Okay. Now, this section here, we know this as the provenance. Okay. This is your W's, your who wrote it, what type of source it is, where it was made, when it was made, why it was made. Some of this stuff will be relevant to you when it comes to answering your question because it could potentially affect how useful it is to you. For example, who wrote it might affect whether you should trust it fully or not. Things like that. We'll discuss that in a bit anyway. I want to focus on the source itself first. So we call this the content of the source, what is literally in it. So I'm going to go through, and anything that tells me something about trench foot, I'm going to highlight it. The trenches were wet and cold. Okay, wet and cold, that might link to trench foot. And some of them did not have duckboards covering the mud on the floor of the trench. Many trenches also did not have dugouts where soldiers could shelter while they slept. The battalion lived in mud and water. Okay, the battalion lived in mud and water, so they're in mud and water all the time. That might potentially tell me about causes. So I'm just going to label that. Causes of trench foot, potentially. These conditions caused many men. So again, I'm going to label that, just to sum it up. Lots suffered to develop trench foot. And then it gives me a number here. Altogether, about 200 men with trench foot had to be evacuated just from this one section of the trenches. I might say, is that representative? Is that something that happened across the Western Front? Trench foot was a new illness, and it was vitally, I might dig in on that actually, what made it new. And it was vitally important to provide dry socks for the troops. So they got dry socks, okay, that's a method of prevention. Can you see what I'm doing? I'm just labeling the bits I'm highlighting just to give myself a little bit more detail on them. Rubber boots were provided. Okay, so that's another way they tried to prevent it in the worst positions in the trenches. One section of the trench was kept as an area where men were sent, 2 at a time, to rub each other's feet with grease. Okay, rub each other's. We've got loads of prevention here, then, haven't we? They would do this at least once a day. So this whole last paragraph really is about how they tried to prevent it. All about treatment and prevention. Okay, cool. So I've now got lots of annotations and lots of parts highlighted. What I now need to do is to go over to my answer booklet and start to try and put some of this into words. So I've gone through already and I've written some sentence starters. When we're answering this question, we want to remember COP. So this is content, own knowledge, and provenance. So the first thing we do is we make an inference based on what we can read or what we can see. If it's a written source, we're going to provide a quote first of all. So I'm going to start off by saying source A says, and then I'm going to copy one of those parts I've highlighted into here and write down what I can learn from that about trench foot. So this is where I return over here and I just pick something. It's got to be linked to trench foot though. So I'm going to go for one of the prevention bits down here. Okay. Okay, no, I'm not. I'm going to go for one of these actually. It says 200 men with trench foot had to be evacuated. So I'm going to whack that in here. It says 200 men with trench foot had to be evacuated. Okay, so I've got my quote. Now I need to say what that tells me. So why is it useful? What does it tell me about trench foot? Well, if lots of men had to be evacuated, it means that it was pretty serious. It means that they can't go on fighting. And we've got 200 here, so that's quite a lot just in one section of a trench. So let's finish this off. This is useful as it tells me that trench foot affected many soldiers and was so serious that they could not go on fighting. Okay, so that's the first part of my COP. Okay, so I've looked at the content and I've made an inference based on it that is linked to the focus of my question. Okay, so I've now done the first part of my first paragraph. I've referenced the content, I've given a quote, and I've said what I can infer about trench foot from that. Next, I need to move on to the next part, which is own knowledge. That's why I put OK here. What do you know about the historical period that supports what the source is telling you, or disagrees with what the source is telling you? From that, we can make an assessment as to whether the source can be trusted or potentially cannot be trusted based on how accurate it is. All we need to do is make one comment on this. So we're going to provide a fact, and then we're going to say whether this supports or opposes the source. And again, we're going to try and give a quote here. So first of all, I need to drop some of my own knowledge in here to do with trench foot. So it's important you've done your revision. Now, I know that about 20,000 soldiers were affected with this in the first winter. That's 20,000 British soldiers. So I'm just going to write that down. I know that roughly 20,000 British soldiers were treated for trench foot in the winter of 1914 to 15. So there's my fact. Okay, so I've put my fact in just here. I then need to decide if this is supported by the source or disagrees with what the source is telling me. Now, the source, as I've already highlighted, has said that many men develop trench foot, altogether 200 in just this one section. So I think my own knowledge supports what the source is saying here. So that means I can trust the source a little bit more. I know that it's at least partially accurate. So I'm going to write that. This supports. Now, obviously, in yours, you wouldn't put support supposes like this. You would just write the one that you believe in. Just doing this for purposes of this. So this supports the source where it says many men, end quotes, suffered from trench foot. Okay, so I've given some of my own knowledge and I've said whether that supports or opposes the source. And again, I can tick this bit off now. I've compared it to my own knowledge. I've put it through that test. Then the last bit is also the most important bit. It's this letter, it's P. This is where we look at the provenance of the source. So what type of source it is, where it was made, when it was made, all that kind of stuff, and just leave a discussion on what is potentially helpful and what is potentially less helpful. Okay, so again, I'll reiterate what I've just written. This supports the source where it says many men suffer from trench foot. Because of this, the source can be trusted to a greater degree. Okay, just to finish off that last part. So now onto provenance. So I'm going to go back to my source. I'm going to have a look at some of these bits at the top here. I'm going to do this quickly because I'm running out of time on this one. So who, what, where, when, why. So it was written after the First World War by Captain Impey. That means he's an officer. So he should be responsible for the health of his soldiers. Captain Impey was an officer in the Royal Sussex Regiment, which served on the Western Front. So we know what he's talking about. He experienced it. Here he's describing the conditions in the trench and the problem of trench foot. Okay, we don't know any more than that. We don't know whether it was a diary or whatever, but we do know it was written by someone who was there, who served on the Western Front. We don't know when after World War I it was written, but it was certainly written after. Okay, so I'm going to focus on some of those parts. Source A was written by Captain, and literally use the words, Captain Impey, who served in the British Army on the Western Front. This account was written after the war had ended. Now I need to try and think which parts of this might be useful to us. So I think the fact that he was a captain and the fact that he actually served make this quite useful. The fact that Impey was an officer means he would have been responsible for his troops. Now I'm just going to whiz through this because I'm running out of time. I'm then just going to talk about how because he was responsible, he would have had a knowledge of trench foot, therefore he can speak with authority. I might also want to mention how because he was on the Western Front, he would have experienced this, and so therefore, again, we can trust his opinion. That is all you need to do for each of these paragraphs. Content, own knowledge, provenance. Keep it brief, and you'll get good marks on this. Any questions, pop them in the comments. See you soon.